Michael Brown was nominated by President Bush to a number of Homeland Security positions and twice confirmed by the Senate.
Earlier this evening, I spoke with Mike Brown, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He's coordinating disaster relief of a dozen federal agencies and the American Red Cross.
All right, former FEMA Director Michael Brown, thank you so much for joining us.
Michael Brown, former FEMA Director. Thank you, Michael, as always.
This portion of the Michael Brown Show on BCR is brought to you by Fire TKO FST, the highly effective, non-pressurized, portable fire suppression tool. Go to www.firetko.com to learn more.
And now, the Michael Brown Show on BCR.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Michael Brown Show on BravoCharlieReady.com, a part of the Blue Cell. I wanted to do a separate introduction to this particular podcast. This is an interview of Jake Wood, who is the CEO and co-founder of Team Rubicon. You can find them at teamrubiconusa.org. And the reason I wanted to do an introduction is, one, Jake has a current book out, and the name of the book is Once a Warrior, How One Veteran Found a New Mission Closer to Home. And I would encourage everyone to go get the book. You can find the book wherever books are sold. Once a Warrior, How One Veteran Found a New Mission Closer to Home. But the other reason I wanted to do a separate introduction to this particular podcast is that I know a lot of people in emergency management, Homeland Security, and people outside those professions that will be listening to the podcast. I want you to recognize something about what Jake talks about. He talks about being a warrior. And we all are a warrior in one sense or another, in that we want a mission, we want a goal, we want to go out and do something that is beyond ourselves. And Jake describes that in a way that I find absolutely fascinating and absolutely encouraging. So I hope that you'll watch this podcast and this interview with Jake Wood and come out of it with a renewed sense of you can go do something, that you too, all of you in emergency management, Homeland Security, the jobs that you do, the things that you do are incredibly important. And once you leave that profession, there are still things that you can do along those lines. And for those of you that are outside the profession, there are so many ways in this country to volunteer, so many ways that you can help your local community, your state, your country. And so listen to Jake closely and think about how you can do that. Let's listen to the interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Michael Brown Show on BravoCharlieReady.com and the Blue Cell. I'm really happy today to have Jake Wood, who is the co-founder and CEO of Team Rubicon. Jake, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well. So listen, let's get straight. I want to... Before we get to the book, which I know we want to talk about, there's in the press release, there's a comment that is made about Once a Warrior provides a harrowing look at what it means to be a veteran in the 21st century and the true cost of military service as the forever war drags on. Explain.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, we've been at war for almost the entirety of the 21st century, which I don't think many people really take time to pause and reflect on what that means. And, so what's it mean to be a veteran of the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan? I think it's got some unique challenges when compared to veterans coming back from other wars. And that's not to say that it's worse or that it's better. It's just to say that it's different. There's a couple of things. One, I think most Americans would now be able to reflect back on the war in Iraq and reasonably conclude that it was the wrong war for us to be in. And I think we should be able to say that without emotion and just look at it objectively.
Right.
Two, I think that victory was always very poorly defined in both of those conflicts. And so when victory is poorly defined, it's impossible to achieve. And so without any sense of closure, or really anything that approached closure, it was hard for veterans to kind of tie a bow on the service and sacrifice that they had overseas. And I think that got really complicated 5 or 6 years ago with the rise of ISIS, which, for many veterans, and I'll say this particularly for Iraq, and I served in both theaters, but particularly for Iraq, there was at least progress that was made. Whether we could claim victory, I think that's kind of in the eye of the beholder, but there was progress that was made. There were democratic elections that were held. There was infrastructure being built, all of those things. ISIS within 6 months evaporated all of that.
All of it, right?
All of it gone, right? And so if you were a veteran of Mosul or Fallujah or anything in Western Iraq, and you saw that black flag of ISIS unfurl over those cities that you fought and bled in, you just had nothing to cling to anymore. And so it was just really hard, I think, for a lot of veterans to accept that and to really process that. And having those wins, having those moral victories is really helpful as a veteran transitions back to war. It helps them justify their service. And so now they're struggling to figure out, what was it all for?
Can I take it to a different area for just a second?
Sure.
Tell me whether or not you agree or disagree with this. I think also part of the problem is, as I've watched veterans come back, is that when you think about World War I, World War II, or for that matter, even Vietnam, Korea, we didn't have the medical advances that we have today. And so many of those soldiers that would have died in theater end up coming back, but they come back, without a couple of legs or a couple of arms or all of the above, or they come back, with severe wounds, but they're still alive. Is that a factor too?
Oh, it's absolutely a factor. There's a chapter in the book where I explore the cost of the war, and it's also an exploration. It's an exploration of post-traumatic stress. It's also an exploration of exactly what you talked about, this policy of the golden hour, which, the golden hour policy was something the DoD adopted in Iraq and Afghanistan, which basically dictated that no troops would be outside the reaches of a medevac helicopter that could get them into a surgical center within an hour of being wounded. Now, this was kind of an aspiration, and I would say more often than not, the military was able to meet that policy. Of course, there were always extenuating circumstances.
Sure.
And I talk about a story where my squad was in Iraq, in the Anbar province, and one night, one of our combat engineer attachments stepped on an IED. We'd found 2 booby traps. We'd called the bomb squad in to help defuse it. And as we were linking up with that bomb squad, our engineer stepped on a third that we hadn't discovered. He got blown up, immediately lost both of his legs, lost half of one of his arms. His lungs were collapsed. We descended upon him. And so there were 2 things that factored into his survival. First was the golden hour. We immediately started calling in a medevac. And, somewhere 50 miles away, the helicopter started spinning up to come and get him. The second thing was, we had all been trained in tactical medicine. And this was new, right? It used to be that you had the one single medic in your squad, and it was his responsibility to treat the wounded. We still had that medic, but everybody else was carrying tourniquets. Everybody else knew how to treat all of these catastrophic wounds. So all of a sudden, he's got 4 guys on him. We're strapping tourniquets on his leg, strapping tourniquet on his arm. We're decompressing his lung with needle thoracentesis. And lo and behold, this guy survives. I mean, he had no right to survive when you think about the complexity of this wound.
Right.
And we put him on that bird. Honestly, we didn't think he would survive. But, his name's Ray Henniger. And today, Ray Henniger plays on the U.S. Paralympic ice hockey team, pulling himself around the rink on a custom-made sled. And it's honestly one of the most inspiring things that I've ever seen.
But to get to that point, and I don't know him, so you'll have to tell me the story, but to get to that point, he had to hit bottom a few times to crawl out of that. I'm making an assumption here. The PTSD, the physical trauma, all of that. He had to overcome all of that to get to where he is today.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say that. It would be hard to argue that he had an easy road back, on his road to recovery. Ray was an attachment to my squad, so I didn't know him all that well. But in following his progress since he left, I think that the one thing that helped him through that trauma and through that valley of uncertainty, his fiance stayed with him, stood by his side, and they got married after he got back, which is just an unbelievable story of love. And they've built a family, which is really remarkable when you consider the wounds that he suffered. And so I think, when you think about where does somebody like that find the willpower to survive versus, like descending into the caricature that a Lieutenant Dan played in Forrest Gump, right? Like similar wounds. Like, how do you avoid that path? I think having that purpose that he found in his family and, just that will to make the best of his life is pretty remarkable.
This portion of the Michael Brown Show on BCR is brought to you by the Free Agent Mindset publication by Scott Jones. If you think that going out on your own and being self-employed is the riskier option in life, think again. Go to Amazon or www.thenimsstore.com and click on Software and Publications for more information.
Tell me your story. Before we get to Team Rubicon, tell me your story up to that point.
Yeah, first I was fortunate, to contrast my experience to Ray's or to any of the other Marines we lost. I came back with all my fingers and all my toes, and I count those blessings every single day. I joined the Marine Corps in 2005 after college. I chose to enlist versus going in as an officer, so that was kind of a unique path for me. Mm-hmm. So I enlisted into the infantry, was stationed in Southern California, and was deployed to Iraq in 2007 as part of the surge. So that's how I ended up in the Anbar province with Ray. We ran counterinsurgency patrols there for a little under a year, and it was a tough tour. 2007 was the bloodiest year of the war. We were in part of Iraq called the Triangle of Death, so you can kind of add the two together and understand quite what our experience was like. After Iraq, I came back. I tried out for the Marine Corps Scout Sniper Platoon. Or a Marine Corps Scout Sniper Platoon. There are several across the Marine Corps, and was selected in, which was an interesting experience. The Marine Scout Snipers are, I would say, I guess, heralded as the best snipers in the world, and so I had the chance to go to sniper school, which was a challenge. About 75% of the Marines I started with didn't graduate. And honestly, for the entire 10 weeks I was there, I thought I was going to myself.
You thought you were going to be one of those.
I thought I was going to add to their ranks. I mean, it was every day I woke up and I thought to myself, how am I still here? And will I last through today? So I was fortunate enough to graduate, and there was plenty of luck involved in that. But I was put into a 6-man sniper team, and we were deployed to Afghanistan the following year. In 2008, which was a really interesting year in Afghanistan. All the focus was shifted over to Iraq, and the Taliban was making advances across the country. What happened was the Taliban was really resurgent in the southern province called Helmand Valley. Mm-hmm. And the British controlled Helmand Valley, and they were taking so many losses that the British public was demanding that Tony Blair withdraw, and he was considered. So what the U.S. did was we threw 2 battalions of Marines into the Helmand Valley to try to, basically stem that tide and convince the Brits to stay. So my unit was sent to Helmand and attached to a British unit in the hopes of kind of turning the tide a little bit. And it was a nasty year. We took more casualties than any Marine Corps battalion across both theaters that year. And it's really weird, the Marine Corps, has a good amount of legend to it, I guess. But I don't know the last time the Marines were thrown into a situation like that, and they were told, just hold the line. They weren't told to advance or take ground. They're like, we were told, don't lose any ground. And I just thought to myself, man, this is a weird position for the Marine Corps to be in. Right. And I guess to wrap that story up, at the end of that tour, it was a tough tour. I just decided after reflecting a lot that I didn't want to continue to go to war. And it was not because I was disenfranchised or disenchanted or any of that. It was just that I didn't want war to consume my life. And so I made the tough choice to get out after my 4-year commitment.
Yeah.
This portion of the Michael Brown Show on BCR is brought to you by the Blue Cell LLC Training Division. With over 100 courses available within the areas of crisis, consequence, and incident management, the Blue Cell has online, virtual live, or in-person options. Go to www.thebluecell.com/training to sign up today.
You get out after that 4-year commitment. Do you go back home to California? What do you do? I kind of want to baby step it a little bit between coming back, making that decision you just described, coming back, there's a period between that and Team Rubicon. What's that period like?
Yeah, well, home for me was actually Iowa. That's where I grew up.
All right.
But I was living in Southern California with the Marines. And, in typical Marine Corps fashion, I met a girl. And so after I got back from Afghanistan, I met a girl. And as I was thinking about what I was going to do next, my plan was to go to graduate school and go get my MBA and really just like take 2 years to decompress and figure out what was going to be next. And so I took the GMAT and I applied to all these schools, and I got into a really, really good program in Chicago, and I actually got a full ride scholarship for it. And, I was really proud. I went to my girlfriend, Indra. She's now my wife. And I said, hey, look, I got into this school. It was, one of my top choices, and it was only 2 hours away from my family back in Iowa. And she's like, wow, that's great. Congratulations. I'm not going to Chicago.
I'm not going.
And
you've now faced the strongest enemy.
Exactly. And so I had, that was my first tough choice. And so I ended up making a decision not to go to Chicago. And instead, I focused my efforts on USC and UCLA, which are both great schools.
Sure.
And ultimately decided I would attend UCLA in the fall. So this is December or January. And, the other school that I was holding out hope for was Stanford, which I felt like, just north of LA, like I could have made that work with her, same time zone and everything. But I got a rejection letter from Stanford right in early January. And I'll tell you, I'm a pretty vindictive guy. I've got a long memory, so I'll never forget that. And frankly, that was the 60-day period between when I got out of the Marine Corps and when Team Rubicon began.
So I love asking this question of CEOs of whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit. You're either laying in bed or you're sitting on your big couch, whatever you're doing, and a neuron snaps in your brain somewhere.
Yeah.
You come up with this crazy ass idea.
Yep.
Your crazy ass idea somewhere was Team Rubicon.
Yeah.
What was that moment?
Yeah, well, I like to tell people that Team Rubicon wasn't born in an MBA class or at a whiteboard. I don't know that there was an idea.
I'm glad to hear that.
I don't know that there was an idea for what Team Rubicon has become, but the moment was the Haiti earthquake. And so the Haiti earthquake happens, mid-January 2010. And I'm sitting there on my couch, drinking coffee when I see the news break. And I had just gotten a rejection letter from Stanford. So I'm a little, hot and bothered, and I'm watching it, and I again, 60 days out of the Marine Corps, I look at that situation. I'm like, man, I can help there. And I'm not starting school till the fall, so I've got time to help.
Yeah.
And so I call around and I'm trying to figure out where I can plug in, and everybody says no, which is super irritating at the time. But now, fast forward 10 years, I run a global humanitarian organization. If some idiot called me after a massive earthquake and told me how special he was, I'd tell him to go pound sand too. So
time out. Can I just say that as the former undersecretary, the number of times I had to say no.
Yeah.
And then got chastised for that.
Yes.
But people don't understand that you have to figure out a way to integrate that.
Yeah.
If you can't integrate it, it's going to make things even worse.
Exactly. Yeah. And listen, I didn't get that at the time. I just thought I was so special
Right.
that they needed me, which was, whatever. I can laugh about it now. At the time, obviously, I didn't, because then I started going around to a bunch of my buddies and I said, hey, you want to go to Haiti? Fast forward about 3.5 days, we're in the Dominican Republic preparing to cross the border into Haiti with a bunch of medical supplies on our back and with a handful of doctors in tow. And that was Team Rubicon. We had 8 people, 5 of them military veterans, 2 of them doctors, emergency room physicians, and a Jesuit priest. So we like to say, it's the start of a bad joke. 5 vets, a couple of doctors, and a Jesuit priest walk into a bar after an earthquake. And that was, those were the humble beginnings of Team Rubicon. And again, so it wasn't like I was sitting around and I had this aha moment, oh, veterans disaster response, let's do that. It was, I see a disaster, I want to help. I think I have the skills and the necessary or requisite experiences because of my time overseas.
Right.
We did it. And then it was while we were down there that we started to kind of ruminate on what we were seeing and experiencing, and to be completely transparent, we were still completely ignorant of the broader space, the broader challenges. We saw this microcosm,
Sure,
the challenge, and foolishly thought that we could make a difference. Now, like, we were fools. I think we ended up being right, but I'm not going to conflate the two, right? We kind of got lucky in that. But we came back and we set out to build upon that moment, and the result 11 years later is Team Rubicon.
With more than 100,000 volunteers, most of which, 3/4 maybe of which are veterans.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you find that those veteran volunteers, that this has fulfilled that desire to have a mission and a goal and doing something good?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that play out time and time again. And it doesn't, we talk about things like purpose and community and sense of identity. And those are critical to any human being, regardless of whether they're a veteran or not. But I think veterans, they suffer like a pretty dramatic reduction in those things on their transition from service. And so, yeah, I mean, we see that, we definitely see that as a big contributor to the passion and enthusiasm that our volunteers have. They want to serve something bigger than themselves, and this gives them the opportunity to.
Let's just swerve. Let's make a hard right turn going 80 miles an hour.
Okay.
You've written a book.
Yeah.
And the title intrigues me. And let me just give me 30 seconds here.
Mm-hmm.
The title is Once a Warrior, How a Veteran Found a New Mission Closer to Home. Once a warrior? Aren't you still a warrior, just in a different theater?
Yeah, I think that's the point, right? In the book really explores that as a theme. Like, first, I think it begs the question and explores the question, what is a warrior, right? And there's a kind of a missive in one of the early chapters that, asks the question, was I a warrior? Looking back on my wartime experience, was I a warrior? Like, and if so, why? What made me a warrior? Was it just the fact that I was in the Marine Corps? Like, maybe. Some people would argue yes. Was it the fact that I was in the infantry? Perhaps. Was it the fact that I actually was in regular contact with the enemy? Again, I don't know. But then does it really matter? Like, was that even a title that I was aspiring to?
Right.
And then throughout the book, it really, there are a couple of moments that have happened in my life where I really reflected back on, I think I was a warrior. I think I met that bar, even though, like, I say this in the book, but like, I once had spent a night drinking whiskey until the sun rose with guys that were in Latin raid. And so I look at those guys, I'm like, I don't know that I actually meet the bar. But I'll give you, one of those anecdotal stories. We were in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan, and randomly, like small world, I'm on the tarmac in Manila, putting a team of our gray shirt volunteers onto a C-130, Marine Corps C-130, to send them down to Tacloban, which was ground zero for the typhoon. And among these dozen volunteers that were sending down on a team is a Marine that was in my squad in Iraq. And that was an interesting moment for me to reconnect with him in that regard. But even more small world, as we're sitting there on our packs on the tarmac, somebody behind me hollers my name, and I turn around, and it's a Marine in uniform with a sniper team. And I look up, and it takes me just a moment to place him, and it was my sniper platoon commander from Afghanistan.
Whoa.
And I walk across the tarmac, give him a big hug. And what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm putting this team on that C-130 to take them down to Tacloban to hold security at the airport, at the airfield. And we had this So we sat there for 30 minutes and we reconnected, and I asked him, like, what are you doing? And he talked about, he had gone back to Afghanistan subsequent to our tour, and we talked. I told him how sad that made me, and there was this moment where we were debating the merits of the war and all of that. And then I asked him, like, when are you going to get out? And he said, he basically said, I don't know. I don't know what I'm ever going to do with my life. Like, this is all I know: how to be a Marine, how to be a sniper, how to be a warrior. He effectively said. And I said, listen, man, you don't have to carry a gun for the rest of your life to be a warrior. Like, that's a mentality. That's a philosophy. That's an outlook on the world. That's not a job that you hold or a title that you retain in the Marine Corps. And it was just kind of this moment of clarity for me. How many people, stay in the fight, stay in the service because that's all they know and that's all they think they can be, or that's all they want to be. And I guess I've tried to convince people that there's an opportunity to serve your country in really powerful and meaningful ways and take that warrior mentality to different levels in things like Team Rubicon. We don't have to carry a gun and go to war.
Want to keep up with Michael Brown and his various shows? Find him on Spreaker, Michael Brown Unplugged, or on iHeartRadio. You can also stream his daily AM radio shows on KHOW and KOA.
Let me ask you, and I go back to my experience at Ground Zero in 9/11, and this kind of goes to your point about you show up in Haiti and you think you're just going to walk in and you're going to save the world. Somebody on my press team made a comment about firefighters, or their boots are wearing out within a day digging through the rubble, and the American public hears that, and suddenly we have a warehouse full of boots that we can't do anything with.
Yeah.
We can't fit them, we can't do anything else. Long story short, I'm trying to get to, how do you as Team Rubicon, how do you now integrate? Like, for example, if I were still the undersecretary and I've got my federal coordinating officer in a disaster zone in an AOR, and you show up, or you tell me you're going to show up, how do you integrate?
That's been the evolution of the organization. So back in 2013, following Hurricane Sandy, which was a huge moment for us, but also one that I reflect back on and wonder how none of our people were killed. We made the commitment to adopting ICS as our standard operating methodology for everything that we do, and so we have fully bought into National Incident Management System, ICS, as our command and control infrastructure, which allows us to walk into these communities and liaise with these different agencies at federal, state, or local levels, speak their same language, provide for them typed out resources that they can understand and comprehend and that they can utilize just as if they were their own, right? And I think we have built, the similarities between that infrastructure and how the military operates are so close. It's the civilian version of military command and control. Exactly. And so our volunteers are just so adept at it. And I would argue, and this isn't, I tend not to make arguments juxtaposing us to other disaster response organizations. I'd say we've built a competency in ICS that's unparalleled in the nonprofit space.
That's my impression based on everything I've seen and watched, et cetera. Let me ask you this question. Do you have a methodology, a way, a plan, an organization? How do you, in advance, because this was always my kind of bugaboo, how do you as is it fair to call you an NGO?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So how do you as an NGO, pre-disaster, go work with elected officials, which can oftentimes be that roadblock to getting things done and getting integrated? How do you as an organization interface with elected officials?
Yeah, well, in total honesty, we've been woefully inadequate at that. That has been, we have not been methodical in our approach to government affairs. And in only just this year have we really deliberately stepped into that space. So we hired a gentleman back in January named Jeff Byard, who was a senior level FEMA official, actually nominated at one point to run FEMA.
Yep.
And so we hired him in as a senior level, a VP internally to manage our government affairs relationship or function. And, he's starting to build out a team and a function around that. And we're only just now starting to see the fruits of that labor. We all know, you're in the space, disasters are inherently local. You have to have those relationships at a local level, and they've got to be blue sky relationships. That's just the mantra, and everybody knows it. We just had not prioritized it. We were prioritizing recruiting volunteers, training them and organizing them and getting them in the field. Government affairs seemed like a luxury for the first 10 years. Now we understand just how important and critical it is to the future.
It really is. Having, whenever I'm giving speeches around the world, I talk about building those relationships in advance.
Yeah.
Because an elected official who never expects bad things to happen, when the bad thing happens, they want to talk to somebody that they know, that they have a relationship with.
No doubt. And, the good news, I guess, is that there are a few things that elected officials love as much as veterans. and that's actually pretty nauseating to me, how it's just kind of treated like a political, shiny object, but it does serve a purpose for the purposes of getting in the door and getting them to pay attention. Like, I could use this on my camp.
Yeah, come on in.
The troops. It's like, come on.
I love it. So let's go back to the book. I don't want to take you much of your time. Once a Warrior: How One Veteran Found a New Mission Closer to Home. Where can we get the book?
Yeah, you can get it anywhere books are sold. The big boy Amazon, any independent retailers through something like IndieBound. Barnes and Noble's got a bunch of copies. Would love somebody to pick it up. And the Audible version. I know there's probably a handful of Marines out there listening to your thing with a third grade reading comprehension like me. I actually read the audio book, so you can hear it live from my perspective if you want.
Now let's get the spiel in for Team Rubicon. How can people listening help, volunteer, give money, whatever it is that you need? How do they do that?
Yeah, well, listen, I imagine most of your listeners are emergency management professionals, and listen, we can use you. If you're looking for a place outside of work to put your profession to practice, if you find yourself often on the outside looking in of major disasters across the country, and you wish you could go flex your muscle in other communities that are experiencing crisis, we'd love to have you. It's not exclusively military. We take people from the EM community. We empower them to take their skills, to bring their skills to bear. And then, finally, you mentioned we're an NGO, we're a nonprofit. We don't actually take government money. We are fueled entirely by philanthropy. So if you're approaching the end of the year, you're looking to make a charitable contribution, or what's that thing called where the federal government deducts some of your paycheck? The combined federal campaign, CFC.
Right. Yes.
If you want to make a CFC contribution, we're on CFC. We could take. We'll appreciate anything we can get.
And I assume people too can just send you a check or give you a credit card number or whatever.
Absolutely.
What's the website?
You can go to our website to either volunteer or donate. It's www.teamrubiconusa.org.
Teamrubiconusa.org. Hey, Jake, I always hesitate saying this. Thank you for your service. But you know what? Thank you for your service, not only for your military service, but thank you for what you're doing now. Thank you for the whole Team Rubicon. I think, my gosh, I dream of how I could have used you on 9/11, on the wildfires in California or out west, how I could have used you in Katrina. There's so many places I could have used an organization like this.
We appreciate it.
Honestly, I'm jealous.
Well, America's worth serving. It's worth serving, so it's an honor to serve.
It is, absolutely. Jake, thanks for your time. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.